Hello, everybody. My name is Aviance Brown. So excited to be here with you all today. Kate, if it's possible, it says that I can't screen share. If you could give me that access, that would be great, but I'll keep talking if not. Like I said, so excited to be here with y'all today. Aviance Brown here. I am an attorney with Forward Justice. I am based in North Carolina. We are a law policy and strategy center, and I engage in movement lawyering, but we don't just file lawsuits. We have a three-tier prong approach to the way that we handle things at Forward Justice, by which we have a team of lawyers, a team of organizers, and then our comms team, which is dynamic. And so we sort of interplay with each other to make sure that we are staying solid and rooted in our community, to make sure that we are centering the voices of those who are directly impacted. Thanks, Kate. Let's see. Okay. So, as you all probably read, we'll just be discussing the essential role of the courts. And right now, North Carolina is in the fight of our lives in terms of our democracy. Our courts play a role in the checks and balances of our governing body, right? So we know that we have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And so our courts right now have a key role in protecting our democracy. We have filed several different lawsuits in North Carolina, which some of you may be aware of, and I'm going to talk about those right now. But essentially, judges who will have a direct voice in deciding some of those cases regarding the freedom and our democracy in North Carolina are up for re-election right now. They are on the ballot right now, and so the stakes are high, and we are engaging in a lot of voter work, a lot of voter registration work. I don't know if any of you all are familiar with our Unlock Our Vote case, but we were successful this year with securing the right to vote for everybody who has been convicted of a felony, unless they are serving a sentence in prisons right now. And so that's huge in North Carolina, because essentially the way that it was before is that you had to be completely off all types of probation. You had to have paid all your court related debt. You could not be on anything attached to the criminal legal system. Your sentence had to be done and complete. And that was holding back 56,000 voters. And so we've been successful in securing the right to vote for 56,000 new voters this year, who we are now taking that extra step to ensure that they are registered to vote and geared up and educated and ready to head to the polls. And so judges will have a role on those ballots, and we have, like I said, several cases pending. And so I just wanted to kind of give you all a brief timeline on the state of the democracy right now in North Carolina, to explain a little bit about why we have filed some of the lawsuits that we have. So using the 2010 census data, our General Assembly enacted these legislative districts for the Senate and the House, impacting over 117 districts, 8 million North Carolinians. And what they did was they contracted with an external organization to gather race-based data, and they drew those districts based upon that race-based data, packing Black districts and diluting the Black vote in North Carolina. And of course, there's always a legal challenge here in North Carolina. And so we represent the NAACP on all of our state actions. And so we filed a lawsuit on behalf of the NAACP challenging those districts. And also there was a parallel suit filed in federal court. So it's the Covington case. And essentially in Covington, it went up to the US Supreme Court and it ruled that those districts were an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. And that is still not that specific case. Of course, they were ordered to go back and redraw. And it's the still ongoing battle. Here we are 10 years later, still entrenched in legal battles over congressional districts in North Carolina. Because what we see is we have these folks who utilize this data, right? They redraw the districts and it's the same people. So they still have access to the same information. It's not like there's any evidence of an intent to change in any way, because we have some of the same sitting legislative members on the Congressional Redistricting Committee. And so this is an ongoing legal battle with regard to race-based gerrymandering in North Carolina. And then we have a series of bills that follow. So in 2013, we have this voter ID bill that is introduced, House Bill 59. What our General Assembly does is holds it for several months. There's no vote on it. It doesn't progress. They hold it, and ironically, Shelby gets decided, which is another Supreme Court case, which struck down pre-clearance requirements. And North Carolina was a state that required pre-clearance. So in essence, any changes that would be made to voter requirements, especially those that would impact minority individuals, had to have some federal pre-clearance. So Shelby gets struck down. Our General Assembly immediately passes this bill, this voter ID bill, 589. We challenge that bill on the basis of race discrimination, because essentially what happens is they create this bill and permit the voter IDs that are essentially most or restrict the types of voter IDs that are most held by Black voters. And so they gathered data to determine what types of IDs voters had across our state and restrict those that are typically held by Black voters. So one of those being public assistance IDs. Those were a type of IDs that are restricted. And they say that they do this because there's this voter fraud, even though still today they have produced no evidence of in-person voter fraud, right? They create this law. And so it gets struck down on the basis of racial discrimination. Fast forward to 2018, our General Assembly, I put non-representative there, is because they have racially gerrymandered themselves into our General Assembly and are creating laws, even though they are not representative of the people of North Carolina. What they did in 2018 was introduce the constitutional amendment. So what they say is, if we change the Constitution to make it so that voter ID is required, we don't need this bill, right? Because it's now a constitutional amendment, a constitutional requirement. And so this gets passed, this constitutional amendment gets passed, and then we see this implementing legislation, SB 824, which we have now challenged are entrenched in a legal battle over. We've challenged that in federal court. We won back in 2019 on a preliminary injunction, meaning that a judge determined that it was without going to trial, it was more than likely that there was evidence to show that they use race-based information to discriminate in the enactment of these laws, and struck it down. And then, of course, that case gets appealed and a panel overturns that decision. The good thing is, currently in North Carolina, there is no voter ID because there was a state challenge to that as well. So we filed our case in federal court, another partner organization filed their case in state court, and that state court case has barred voter ID right now. So there is no voter ID requirement in North Carolina. And I know that was kind of a run-of-the-mill things of things that are happening in the state right now, but essentially all that to say, our courts matter. Our elected officials matter. And on the ballots across the United States, whether you're in North Carolina or not, right? We have these judges, we have these district attorneys, we have sheriffs, clerks, all of these folks are stakeholders in our democracy. and will have some say in our democracy. And so it is essential that we get out to the polls and that we are informed on who these judges are, who these DAs are. We know about the issues with the criminal legal system, and I'm not going to get in that today. I'm going to focus on voting and our democracy. But we know that the challenges within the criminal legal system, right? The district attorneys hold so much power, and those are elected officials. In North Carolina, some of the cases that I was referring to are sitting in the Supreme Court. And our Supreme Court right now, we have seven justices, and there's a 3-4 split by party lines. In North Carolina, judges appear on the ballot based on their party affiliation, which I think is completely absurd considering they're supposed to be neutral arbitrators of the law, right? We shouldn't be able to go in and vote judges in based upon Republican or Democrat because they're supposed to be a neutral party. Nonetheless, they appear on the ballot, and currently there's a 3-4 split. What that means is some of the cases that I've talked about. So the case that has allowed folks with felony convictions sits in the Supreme Court. It is on appeal right now in the Supreme Court, and we are awaiting a hearing in 2023. In this election, that court could change. The composition of the court could change. That will have major implications for the outcome of our case, and whether those 56,000 folks who have the right to vote right now will continue to be able to exercise that right next year and years to come. We also have another case, the constitutional amendment case that I was discussing earlier, that sits in the Supreme Court, that will also be impacted by this election because the judges who are in that court are on the ballot. Several of their seats are on the ballot right now. And if we change the composition of the court, those decisions could either be for or against us. And so it is imperative that we exercise that right. In 2020, Chief Justice Beasley sat on the Supreme Court in North Carolina and lost by a mere 401 votes, which shifted the courts, which meant that Justice Paul Newby took over. In our current case, where we have our constitutional amendment case, where things are currently sitting in our favor, the opposing party has filed to have a 3-judge panel hear our case. Well, guess who appoints 3-judge panels? The Chief Justice. So Chief Justice Newby, if that motion gets granted, will get to hand select which justices will sit on our panel. Judges matter. These judicial elections matter. I just wanted to briefly highlight, even though this is not necessarily democracy related, I want to talk about just in understanding the roles of the courts, right? A little bit of our fines and fees work. Many of you know that our courts serve as a debtor's prison. There are millions of dollars issued in court debt amongst the poor community each and every year. In North Carolina, we have not seen an increase in minimum wage in years. It sits at $7.25. Nonetheless, our court fees are climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing steadily. They've increased from $41 to $147 in district court. So we see this steady increase, right? What we've done is essentially gotten a rule in place by which we've asked to have the courts consider a person's ability to pay before imposing fines and fees. What does that mean? That means that the district attorneys will either get to consent or oppose that motion. And what we've done is ask them to consent. When poor people come into court and say that I cannot pay, please do not oppose them, right? What does that mean when it goes for a judge who's also an elected official? The judge gets to decide whether or not they have enough money based upon the motion that they file, whether they have enough money to pay their court fines. And so the implications the stakes are high, right? When it comes to who sits in our courts, these are people who impact people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And so something that I really, really, really want to implore folks to do is to hold these elected officials accountable beyond the election, right? I just discussed essentially the role of the courts in our voter ID case, in several of our democracy related cases, these judges matter. Their opinions on these cases will create long-standing law. And so it is imperative to hold these folks accountable beyond elections. We engage in organizing and court watching to see how people are being treated on a day-to-day basis in court. Because it's easy for a judge to run and say things during an election, right? But we sit in court and we watch how are they ruling on fines and fees? How are they ruling on probation matters? Those are things that are impacting folks' day-to-day lives. And so we, like I said, we are in the fight of our lives in terms of our democracy. And with regard to our three cases that are currently sitting, essentially that the case in which we've gotten folks the right to vote who have felony convictions, who even folks, excuse me, people who are not in prison, everyone else gets to vote on that case. That case is sitting right now before the Supreme Court. And so we have these three cases by which the judges in those cases matter. Their voices matter, and we have to protect our democracy through these elections. And in terms of thinking through the laws, right? So we have our General Assembly who enacts these laws, and we know their track record. They have a history based upon what has happened over the past 10 years of race-based discrimination in their enactment of laws, whether that is through racial gerrymandering, where they pack districts, diluting Black votes, diluting the right of Black voters in North Carolina, or whether that is through the exclusion of Black voters through these voter ID laws, right? They have a track record of race-based discrimination through the law that many people are not aware of. And so the way that we are holding them accountable is through these lawsuits, right? So we challenge them each and every time, but that is done through our community. Our community comes to us through the NAACP. Our community comes to us and says, hey, what is it that we can do about this? We have these people who are formerly incarcerated who want to vote. What is it that we can do about this? And we strategize that way. We have these people who are saying that they don't have the proper identification and they can't get it. What is it that we can do about this? And we strategize, right? And so we go to the courts. And I just want it just to really be stressed that we must protect our democracy. And one of the ways that we can do that is through our courts. And I'm not saying that litigation is the only way to do that. That is one of the tools that we use in our toolbox to do that. But again, the organizing, the strategizing, the on the ground efforts also are a way to continue to protect our democracy. And it is so imperative that we hold these folks accountable and move forward, not just during the election, but moving beyond the election, ensuring that we are keeping our General Assembly members accountable, keeping our judges, keeping our district attorneys accountable. There's so much happening in North Carolina, and I wish that I could go all into it. One of them, I don't know if anybody has heard about one of the sheriffs in Columbus County, North Carolina, a small town that has made some extremely racist remarks, right? What we've done is gone to the court officials, asked to have this person removed. So the courts are essential. And I know that I'm running up against my time here, so I just want to end just by saying thank you so much for having me here. And I'm encouraging everybody to get out and vote and to bring a person with them to the polls and stress the importance of our courts and the elected officials on the ballot.
Thank you so much. I learned so much from this short amount of time. I appreciate it. We have two quick questions that came through. The first was, where can we find more information in terms of our courts, our own state courts? Where should people go?
Yeah, so we have the Board of Elections, in which I think I don't know exactly everybody's Board of Elections websites, but ours spells out really in detail if you plug in your information. It'll tell you exactly who's on your ballots, and you can even filter it for judicial elections, and you can go in and see who's on your ballot in the judicial candidacy, and look up voter information about them. And so we have that on our Board of Elections, on our state issued Board of Election sites.
Perfect. And then the next question was, if you could say one or two things that voters should look for when they're qualifying a judge on the ballot, what would those one or two things be?
Yeah, I would say their track record, and that's not going to be on the ballot, right? Which is why I was saying that it is important for us to do our digging beforehand, because it's easy for folks to get out and say any old thing on the campaign trail, and that is common, right? But what is their track record? What do they stand for? What have they done in their community before they've gotten here? Have they already been a judge? What types of decisions have they ruled on? What way did they decide on? And that takes some digging. It takes a little bit of homework to do. But I've done a Google search myself, right, on some of the judicial candidates who are on the ballots in North Carolina, and have quickly been able to form opinions to see, kind of where they stand and what decisions they've issued.
That's super helpful. I think some people forget, myself included, that Google exists. How great it can be at times. Thank you so much. This was incredible. I can't wait to watch it again and process and use this as I continue to track the courts and qualify judges and become more informed myself. And I know that others on too are going to be rewatching this and rewatching this. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the work that Forward Justice is doing, and unlock our vote. If you guys are looking for an action item between now and November 8th, I put the link in the chat. There are a ton of opportunities to get involved. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. We will be back in about 4 minutes with our next panel. We have reproductive justice rights beyond the state capitol, which is a good follow-up because reproductive justice rights, as we know, are in the courts. Yeah, so we'll be back in a few minutes. Hang tight, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.